We've already said welcome to Tom, but also welcome to Willie. And we still have James with us to talk about the IAASB. Thank you to the IAASB as well. We've seen, Tom, your report. We've seen your slides, and I'm going to hand over to you. There are quite a bit of things happening. We also prepared yesterday for our session with you. We've got PI Track 2 that's not up for certification at this meeting. We have a special meeting in August, which we're going to do that because there's still a bit of paperwork to be done around that. So over to you, Tom. Again, I'm going to let you speak and go through your presentation, and then I'll share a few thoughts from our side before we open it up for discussion. Thank you.
Oh, it's very good to see all of you. I was listening intently on the last presentation from Gabriella and team. But first of all, I'd be remiss not to thank the PIOB for your continued confidence that you've provided in reappointing me. I'm excited for the challenge of the next 2.5 years. I could reassure you that there's no rest for the weary. We have some important things to accomplish still. And it very much coincides with our completion of our strategy that is about maintaining and enhancing our position as the leading audit and insurance standard setter that's able to evolve to changing public interest needs. We've talked quite a bit over the last couple of meetings about this board at a transition from a work plan perspective, and you're sort of seeing us straddle that position with the topics that you would ask for a deep dive on. And I don't know who's going to have the slides, but I could also just refer to the slides as well. But when you think of PI Track 2, and while we're doing this right now, we know that it'll be put forward for certification later, but we thought we'd give you how we've evolved since we last met. So, as you know, we put out a proposal that would align our board with IAASB's publicly traded entity concept, that would amend our standards to include that concept, and then the idea that we would return at a future date with input and involvement from IAASB about whether to adopt a PI definition in our standards. So that's what we went out with the urging and suggestions and great coordination with the PIOB. We put it out for public consultation, which you'll see on slide 4 of the deck for 45 days. We wanted to make sure as many people participated in the consultation process as possible. So we reminded all the people who participated in the original round, plus we wrote to others throughout the process. And we did receive 37 comments. 30 of them had previously responded to our exposure draft. We also had some really deep discussions with monitoring group members, particularly IOSCO, in the process. If you flip the slide to what we heard, and largely, I think, next slide, please. And if you think about what we heard is, I think there was strong support for the pragmatic position that we took, not to say that people recognized it as 100% satisfactory decision for the long term. And we've talked about this quite some time. We view this as a positive step forward as jurisdictions adopted the PI definition created by IAASB. And, one letter more than anything else sort of reflected this sort of mixed point of view. The IOSCO C1 letter, which basically said they support concluding the current proposal, but we want you to think about where you go next. And if you need a PI definition for your standards to be the basis of differential requirements, and that's really what this is about, in 8 areas, then you should go ahead at a point in the near future. Also, there was some comment from European regulators too they wanted to make sure what we did on PT was consistent with what exists in regulations, particularly using the term listed entities. We have now provided some clarification of that. We do believe it's consistent, and we used implementation guides. So again, there was big support for what we were doing in terms of the pragmatic way forward. We align the effective dates with going concern and fraud, though we permit early adoption. We talk about our preference to have them done as a package, and suggest that was our intent if you're going to move forward. But more importantly, we talk about what's next. And, I think the idea is to do as much jointly with IAASB, not independently, as possible. And both boards are supportive of this approach, and they reiterated that. We reiterated that at our June meeting. So these are some of the ideas on slide 6 of what we're thinking about. I think Philippe talked about sort of as joint as possible, and here are real ways. Now, obviously, we have to implement this. There probably needs to be more thought about how to do this effectively. But whatever we do next, despite IOSCO's urging for us to do what we think is right from an audit side, I think the first point is to do things jointly with IAASB. And so that is in process right now, and us figuring out how to execute best on it. But we wanted to signal to you and to the market that both boards are committed to a joint effort together. Maybe the next thing to do is move to 2410, reviews of interim financial information. And really, we're going to, why you think about the standard, it isn't a standard that has caused fundamental public interest concerns, but it is a standard that is used quite a bit because interim financial information is reported all the time and in different jurisdictions mandatorily. The problem with 2410 is that it hasn't ever been updated to the clarity approach, and it just is outdated in many ways, not to reflect our latest thinking on a few issues. So we talked about at this last meeting about minimum viable project. Our goal is not a major rewrite of this standard. It's about clarifying and updating it, and clarifying that the interim review is just a type of limited assurance engagement, and we're not trying to change the fundamental work effort here in the process. So if you look at on this slide, we talk about grounded in our goals. What's the underlying public interest to drive consistency in practice regarding these interim review engagements, to make sure that there's a global baseline for this in the interim review engagements, and provide more specificity aligned with modern thinking in ISAs and equivalent national standards. And in this regard, one of the unique things is about leveraging partnerships here. We're doing this with partnerships with the Australian and New Zealand standard setters, who are very much integrated into our work team, and in two jurisdictions where they've done significant work on interim financial reporting. So that is at the heart of it. Now, if you switch to the next slide, it gives you a little bit of sense of what we're doing. We very much are leveraging elements of existing standards. This is not new to us. You might recognize we did quite a bit of this in 5000 too. So we're taking a little bit from ISRE 2400 that are relevant to interim review engagements. We're drawing on ISAs themselves in a way that's proportional to what our review engagements are. Remember, ISAs are about reasonable assurance engagements. We are not trying to recreate that, but focusing on a limited assurance engagement. And then we're taking some of the best thinking in 2410. But again, sort of applying the constraint about what's the minimum viable product necessary to get this standard updated and useful on a global basis. One of the areas that we did get feedback on, both from the board and from PIOB participation, is the timeline. Remember, we made the declaration, no new major standards before 2027. This would not fit into the major standard category. In fact, we're being asked by standard setters and practitioners to update the standard. So we looked at our resource availability, and we figured while we had originally stretched it out to the 2027 thing, we saw that we could accelerate the timetable a little bit here. And so, you'll see right here is that we anticipated a vote next year, early next year, to approve the ED. And so we've compressed the timetable so we can get this out into the marketplace as soon as possible. Let me turn to the final area, audit evidence and risk response. Aaron, if you could see the first slide of this, which is on slide 12 of your deck, and what drives this area. So first of all, I should say this is probably the most complex and technical project that we have on our work plan, and will have deep implications potentially for audits. It's the core of the audit, gathering audit evidence and the risk response. And it also, from our standpoint, is one of the 3 tracks that we're dealing with from a technology perspective. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about improving the application of professional judgment and professional skepticism, and gathering audit evidence and risk response. And then objective B, and this is something we align very closely with you as the PIOB, is not only about general promoted consistent practice in auditor about effective responses. This sort of is a follow-on from 315, but with a special emphasis on include the strengthening of auditors' work on internal controls. And then C, obviously, is making sure that these standards are fit for purpose to address technological innovation, and the evolution of new technological resources and tools. And so this is the goal. These are public interest things. At the end of the day, we'll have to circle back to make sure that we've fulfilled these objectives. And that's what we'll be judged on. But during the process, we've specified a large range of issues to tackle as a result of that assessment. And it will look quite detailed when we go through the technical debates at the board. It just is the reality of these standards, that it's a highly conceptual standard, highly technical things. We need to get this right because it'll drive audit methodology. So we're at the very early stages of this project. And what I would like to say is that while we go through all the issues, and you flip the slide, that everything is an informed hypothesis at this moment that we're working to test with external stakeholders. This means we're having focused discussions with users where necessary, which is quite complex on technical issues. We had detailed discussions with jurisdictional standard setters, and we're monitoring national developments on this age. We're constantly doing deep dive sessions with practitioners through the form of firms and the GPPC, but also with audit regulators, and we'll have regular working groups and workshops. That's where we are right now as we go through the range of complex technical issues on this standard. And if you go to the final slide, you'll start to see the topics that we've are dealing with. And I know some of them are topics that the PIOB care deeply about, such as stand back requirements and how we make sure that we're using them appropriately. For example, our desire to have a systematic approach to it. And, we're putting a stand back in 330, but also one in 700 as it relates to this. But we've done that after a systematic assessment of where stand back should go. Authenticity a big topic. We've talked about the paragraph in 200. We shouldn't focus just too much on one sentence, but it's important about when we redraft, think about redrafting anything in ISO 200 on authenticity, that the objective of the appropriate work effort is there to be done, that we provide context of what's required in terms of professional asceticism, and that we look to other wording that exists in our standards to reinforce the necessary auditor's work effort as it relates to authenticity of documents. A lot of focus on test of controls. And then we get to discussions about how we deal with automated tools and techniques and changing the words and how this fits in the process. We are at an early stage of this journey, but we wanted to give you a flavor of the topics that you as a board have raised with us, are getting serious consideration, and are filtering through to the stakeholder outreach as we go along. And as I said, it's one of those topics that you may think that we're just too much in the weeds to begin with, but we're into the weeds because we've done an assessment of what ties back to the public interest objectives up front. And then clearly we'll have to step back to make sure that the picture all makes sense. So I'm going to pause there. Really wanted to open it up to discussion from you on anything I raised here, anything on our work plan, strategy and work plan, or any other topics that we have ongoing at the board that were in my written report.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. And Tom, maybe just some comments from our preparation session, and I'll sort of maybe take it in the reverse order, starting with audit evidence and risk response, and you talking about potentially being in the weeds. You're right. It is a very technical project. It is something that is exceptionally important, and we've raised it as an important project. We also supported your way forward in dealing with this project and the alignment and link between that, and how do you integrate the whole concept of technology throughout the audit and into the audit methodology. So certainly supported by the PIOB. As you know, our job is not to tell you how to do your job. Our job is to tell you why we think it's important and why, or what we believe would be in the public interest. So we do understand that you as a board need to go through your processes of how do you distill that, how do you work through that, so that you can ultimately come to the appropriate level of requirements, updating, and application material in the standards. So definitely a very, very important project for us, and we're looking forward to seeing how that evolves. On 2410, I've actually even forgotten about the Clarity project until you mentioned it now, which is, what is it now, probably 20 years ago, 15 or so. But it is in very big parts of your jurisdiction a really important standard to update, and we understand what you're saying, that this is not a whole makeover. It's an alignment of actually how the rest of the standards fit together. It is important, certainly in the space where I operate, there's always the risk, because the standard is so old and out of date, that different auditors apply it differently. So it's important that you go ahead and do that. It's inevitable, if you touch a standard like that with limited assurance, that the bigger debate on what's the bar for limited assurance and how does limited assurance and reasonable assurance fit together, and definitions and so on, I think you're going to have to prepare yourself for that. I know that's not the scope of this project, but it is important as you start thinking about your strategy and work plan going forward. It might be necessary to pick up that topic again. I don't think it's somewhere that the question will continue to come up as you put it out for, we think, as you put it out for consultation and so on. And then just on PI-Track 2, because it is the last time that we have a chance to talk to you about it, and it has been a complicated project in a way, because it was meant to just be a response, or let's call it the dealing with the consequential amendments needed because of the work that IAASB has done on the definition of PI, with a very specific objective around, audit independence and so on, and non-audit services. But we have encouraged you to put it out for another round of consultation, and we're very comfortable that you did. We believe that is the appropriate way to show that you really considered stakeholder input, and we obviously saw the input. Thank you. We had very good feedback from Mark as well as our observer regarding all the different stakeholders and how they came back, and also the support when it comes to where you are, bearing in mind that it is not necessarily the end game. There's certainly a job to be done and a potential project, a joint project potentially between yourselves and IAASB, as IAASB also, and you said you're going to do that as IAASB goes into their post-implementation review on the PI definition of what is it that you, between the two of you, need to align when it comes to that. So we recognize that, and that was not yet the intention of this project, but that is where you are now. The one outstanding question that we have to ask is just around IASCO, because you gave a little bit of feedback on that, but in the way that we understand it is IASCO was strongly encouraging for pick it up. You don't have to have the same definition as IAASB, but we understand your risk around that, and maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the very importance of consistency when it comes to definitions in audit across jurisdictions. But maybe just if you can just sort of close the loop for us on IASCO, where they stand, and the comfort that you got that going ahead the way you do for now, bearing in mind that there might be further project coming up in due course, as you referred to, is okay. I think that is the one that is sort of hanging in the air. And I've made the point, but maybe just to put it as a separate point, is the importance of, I almost want to say, by definition 2.1, somewhere in the fairly near future on how do we take that forward out of the lessons learned from what IASCO IAASB will see in their post-implementation review, and how can we better align and further take this forward jointly as the two standard setting boards. Just give me 1 second. I just want to make double sure that I haven't. No, I think that I picked up on all the key points. I'm going to let you come back, and I see Tom's hand is up. So maybe just come back on this, some of the general things, and then I'm going to go, as I do always, into the hands up from my board members. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you for that. I dare to say PI track 3 already, but anyway, we had a high degree of confidence that, first of all, that IASCO was supportive of what we were concluding on and what we will certify to you. Vili and team had a number of conversations with the C1 Secretariat, confirmed, because their letter, we wanted to make sure that we interpreted it properly, and they confirmed that they were happy with us to go ahead. And what the slight nuance that they said was, don't be constrained by IAASB going forward on the PI definition. Now, they didn't say don't do something with IAASB. And our starting point is, let's make sure definitions are as consistent as possible, or even the same as possible. Otherwise, we're going to cause confusion in the marketplace, because there's a huge overlap with what. So my attitude is, to satisfy them, the first place to go is to do something jointly with IAASB on the using their post-implementation review as the starting point. What we haven't quite done is how to figure out the mechanics of doing that. So Vili's and our team's plan are to have a discussion with IASCO in this month, just to circle back with them. That at least that's the first point, and then we could make a determination going forward if perfect convergence isn't achieved, whether we need to go our separate ways. But I would prefer to view that as a second best or third best alternative, and let's see where we land. And ideally, we'll start first now. And I think that's consistent with what they said, is just don't feel constrained. Well, certainly it's a better solution if we remain consistent and aligned.
Tom, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for clarification, Tom, for this an important topic and PyTrack too. What I would like to ask you is, not ask you, but ask Gabriela, is that your view on this issue, because the frustration of the IOSCO is not to IAASB, but to perhaps to IAASB, because as Tom has suggested, that in the expression, don't feel constrained by the joint project, perhaps. So what is important is that not only the view of the IAASB, but also to the view of the IASB. My impression is that it's very difficult for IASB to change the Q&A, which says that the jurisdictional law and regulation override the code definition. But so if it doesn't change, so it will take quite a long time for the joint project on this issue. So although generally I support the joint project, but if this issue of the relationship with code and law regulation is difficult to solve in a short period of time, I feel some sort of sympathy to the position of IOSCO to say to IAASB that they don't feel constrained. So what is your view on this difficult issue of the relationship of the court and then law and regulation?
So my view?
No. Gabriela's view. I'm asking Gabriela if possible.
So, Gabriela, let's keep it short because this is actually Tom's meeting. So maybe you want to have a minute and then we circle back to you, Tom. Thank you.
Well, I'll be very short because what I have to say is that this letter was not directed to the IASB, but to the IAASB. Of course, we are aware of the IOSCO's thinking, but we haven't yet discussed if there is anything to be done at this point in time on this topic. So we cannot. I mean, we can always change the Q&A, but the Q&A just explain what the standard says. Even if there was a different understanding. So to change the Q&A, we'd have to change the standard, I believe. So this is something that we need to consider together with the IAASB and on the basis of very extensive discussions that we may need to have to see if there is anything that we can do in that respect. And so I'm not in a position, Tom, unfortunately, to say that our vision, what the standard is, what it is. It was approved, it was certified, and etc. The Q&A explain what the standard says, whether if there is a need to change it, that is something that we need to discuss, certainly. So, but we will work very closely with IAASB to at least see ways of mitigating any issues that this different definition may bring, and how we can help stakeholders navigating these differences. But I'm not in a position, Tom, today to say we are going to do this or we are going to do that. This is a very, very significant discussion based on what happened before that I cannot tell you today because it hasn't been discussed.
Thanks, Gabriela. And again, we'll have the conversation when we have the joint discussion on potential joint projects and collaboration and so on. And Gabriela, I'm sure when we have that discussion, you'll also give us some feedback. If I recall, you have on the cards a post-implementation review and all of those things. So let's park the joint element of that for now. I think everybody is quite up to speed and in agreement that it is something that will need a lot of collaboration and working together. So Tom, I'm going to just circle back to you for any comments, and then I'm going to go to the next hands that are up. Thanks.
Yeah, it's Twitch Tom. Me or?
Oh, no. Go ahead, Tom.
No, you're Tom. Go ahead. Sorry. Too many times on this call.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much for the comment to Gabriela for your comment. And just I want to remind you that the Q&A, as you said, that this Q&A is really significant in the sense of, so we have to be a little bit and pay attention to the due process of if you would like to change the Q&A of this issue, because the relationship between the law and regulation and court is one of the fundamental issue of the code itself. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Back to you, Tom.
Well, again, I think we're at a good place right now to be able to soon assess what's happening in the marketplace. I'm an optimist, and I don't want to preempt the work that's going ahead. You have both Gabriela and my commitment to do things jointly going forward, and I think will be led by the evidence and see what the appropriate next steps are. I think it's all in our interest to encourage the adoption of the PI definition set forward by IAASB, and it's in our interest to work jointly with IAASB, and that's where we are as a board.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to go to Mark.
Thanks, Linda. I'm just going to comment very briefly on PI Track 2 because I think everybody's fed up with it. But I think our Tom put his finger on the issue here, the fundamental issue and the fundamental problem, and that is the design of the ISAs versus the code, and that is ISAs require compliance with the ISAs. In the code, if there is jurisdictional requirements, those take precedence and you can still be in compliance with the code. And so until there is jurisdictional uniformity, or at least the major jurisdictions are all uniform, this problem is going to continue. So I wonder actually whether a joint project will actually be able to get anywhere. And I do recall I observed the IAASB meeting back in June last year when the IAASB Q&A was discussed. And I remember suggesting at the time that the IAASB calls PI by another name for use in its in the ISQMs and the ISAs. Call a dog by another name was the expression I used. And it's interesting that actually that's pretty much what IOSCO are saying should happen. So I do wonder whether given the jurisdictional differences that exist, whether a joint project will be successful, and whether actually you should start, at least behind the scenes, looking at a differently named definition for use in the ISAs. But that's enough on PI. I wanted to just make a comment on audit evidence and risk response, because yes, it was a very intense and complex discussion, and frankly it made me realize I'm glad that I left the audit profession 30 years ago and didn't have to deal with all that stuff. But I think seriously, the project proposal on this, as all project proposals tend to, focused on the need to sort of meet the characteristics in the public interest framework, the PIF, and key amongst those in this respect, I think, are clarity and conciseness, understandability, and it was a very esoteric discussion, quite academic in some respects, and I sat there listening to it, and I thought, there were so many, there was discussion about the difference between, a definition and a description, and then all the nuanced cross-references between the various standards. And I just felt that, yes, you have to address technical issues. I do get that. You're a technical board. But I think you need to keep coming back to those characteristics of the PIF, because in order for a standard to be effective, it's got to be understandable and implementable. And my concern is that you're not taking the opportunity to clarify and simplify these standards so that they are more accessible to the smaller audit practitioners who don't necessarily have the the depth of technical knowledge, technical resource that the bigger firms have. So yes, I accept it's got to be technical, but I think you should try and make every effort you can to make these standards easily understandable and accessible to those with limited technical resources.
Thank you, Mark. Tom, do you want to come in?
So we're writing these standards for experienced auditors. These are complex topics. We have not done the drafting of the standard yet, and we will always focus on clarity and scalability in the drafting of the standard. So I'm not in my head in agreement right now saying, yes, of course, we're going to do, but make no mistake, like, we're not writing audit standard for a layperson. We're writing for experienced auditors, and these are the core of an audit. And for us to engage with stakeholders on this, whether they be audit practitioners or regulators, we're going to have what appear to be esoteric conversations in the lead into making decisions that will drive our drafting. And I get, like, it may sound strange to an outsider, but it's sort of like seeing the sausage being made in the process and judging us until the final product is done. And I guess I can't really be apologetic about that. I just think we have to go through the process, and we'll be very conscious of the public interest requirements and the need for writing standards as clear as possible. A little context, remember, we wrote an entirely clear standard, ISA 500 revised in an ED format that was very principle-based, and we're redoing it because it was too high level in the minds of audit regulators and others in the marketplace. And so, like, we'll get that balance right, and we'll be very clear to it. But I think we're going to have a lot of challenging discussions as we take on these topics, because these standards have to stand the test of time too, or they won't be fit for purpose for the types of work that auditors are going to do with advanced technologies going forward.
Thank you, Tom. I don't see any further hands for you, Tom. So I don't know if I think that's a sign of success. If people run out of questions, easy or difficult to ask you. Thank you very much for your time. I just want to double check now. Everybody's hands are down. So thank you. As I wrap up on this session, thank you. We will talk to each other and see each other again in October. We will definitely spend some specific time on the joint project. I will just remind the board members, I'm going to give you a little bit of a longer break because we have a public session after this for the approval of for the certification of the approved standard, the fraud standard that was already approved by the IAASB comes up for certification. And I'm conscious of the fact that people might want to, because they're interested in a dial in for this session. So I can't move the session earlier. So we will have a little bit of a long break now until 10 past the hour. For me, that's 16:10, and then we will convene with the certification session, which will also be in a public session. Thank you, everybody. See you in a while. Back. on time. We are in one of those nice sessions where we have the opportunity to look at one of the standards approved by the IAASB that we can consider for PIOB certification. So we're focusing on the fraud standard today. We thank you, Tom, and thank you to your team for all the documents that you've prepared. As always, we have had our own team look through it, also consider very finely and carefully our public interest issues as well as due process. I'll maybe just say one or two things about the fraud standard, and then I'm going to hand over to Martin and the observation team. But this has been something that's been very, very important for the PIOB, Tom, as you know, for a long time. And because it is such an important standard, and we so often have seen in practice, if whenever there's some or other fraud, fairly or unfairly, everybody will ask, where were the auditors? And an auditor is not a forensic auditor to go and find fraud, but your board has managed to do some quite significant work to make sure that there's sufficient work effort when it comes to the auditor considering the risk of fraud that leads to the misstatement of financial statements, to bring it to a similar level than the auditor's duty to consider the risk of error. So there are lots of positive things that's coming out of the standard, lots of positive things when it comes to transparency. So certainly been one of the key priorities for the PIOB to see how we progress collectively as a group of standard setters, you doing all the work and we looking from the sideline and giving you our thoughts and guidance, Tom and Willie and the team. I'm going to hand over to you, Martin, and then I would imagine probably Pavel or Nerea to just talk us through where we are. Just remind us, because we're in a public session and some people might be interested when they listen to this video, just to be reminded of what the key things were that we tracked as the PIOB, what we refer to as our public interest issues throughout the process, and then we can conclude on that. So over to you first. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Linda. I confirm that that's exactly what we will do. We'll take some time just to work through our conclusions and our recommendations to the board. It's always a team effort here. So on this occasion, it's Nerea who will take that forward, but obviously Pavel, Nerea, myself have been very much involved in all of this together with our board. Nerea, would you like to pick up directly?
Yes, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Linda. So I will just give a brief summary of the key considerations and conclusions that the staff has reached and the recommendation for the board in respect of certification. Just to summarize, the board has received the staff analysis and the IAASB documentation that includes a cover note, the final text of the standard that was approved, the basis for conclusions document, a due process checklist, and the IAASB certification that the standard has been developed in accordance with a great due process and is responsive to the public interest. In terms of due process, the PIOB has overseen the standard setting process throughout the full development cycle of the fraud standard. This standard is the result of public consultation, included a discussion paper, an exposure draft, also deliberation at the IAASB public meetings, and targeted outreach with investors and users, among other stakeholders. So in terms of public interest responsiveness, we have evaluated that the standard meets the PIF, the public interest framework qualitative characteristics, and that the public interest issues that were raised either by stakeholders through the consultation and by the PIOB were effectively addressed. So comments from respondents to the exposure draft were reported to the IAASB and recorded in the issues papers, and they have been dealt with and presented in the basis for conclusion how the IAASB addressed those comments and adjusted the revised standard after the exposure draft. There are two public interest issues that were further discussed in the last meeting of the IAASB that raised some concerns from several stakeholders and also among the PIOB. And those were regarding the consideration of the risk of management override of controls and the inclusion of a standback requirement. So the PIOB discussed this as well in the last board meeting in April, and with Tom as well in the public session. Our observer had attended also that meeting, and we concluded that the provisions were responsive to the concerns raised by the stakeholders and that they were in the public interest. So just focusing now more on the PIOB public interests that were raised during the development of the standard. So there were a number of issues that we had raised, specifically the PIOB called to strengthen and clarify the auditor's responsibilities regarding the identification and the reporting of fraud in audits. The PIOB also encouraged the revision of the role of auditors with respect to the authenticity of documentation across the ISAs. And as we have discussed as well in the previous session, we have acknowledged that the IAASB will take this further through the Audit Evidence and Risk Response project. Also emphasize the impact of other standards on ISA 240 to drive changes in auditors' attitude and behavior throughout the audit process. Noted the importance of coordination with IASB in respect of fraud and NOCLAR. And finally, in terms of transparency, the IAASB highlighted and emphasized the benefits of providing early warning of suspected fraud through communication with those charged with governance, with management, and with external authorities where appropriate. Also, the PIOB has encouraged the IAASB to consider whether the disclosure of significant fraud matters with the key audit matter approach, so through the key audit matter section of the audit report, was the most appropriate, as this is limited to listed entities or publicly traded entities when PITRAC 2 becomes effective. So the PIOB, in respect of this issue, has acknowledged the support from most stakeholder groups through the exposure draft of this approach and the rationale for adopting this decision, but also has recommended the IAASB to monitor whether through implementation, this is addressing sufficiently the stakeholder demands to have more transparency in the auditor report. Overall, the IAASB has considered all the public interest issues raised by the PIOB, except for two where the PIOB has considered that further work and further monitoring will be needed, as I mentioned before. So these closures in the CAM section and the role of auditors in respect of authenticity of documentation. But it's important to highlight that while further work might be necessary, these matters do not detract from the fact that the revised standard is a significant evolution, that it clarifies the role of auditors and strengthens the work effort and enhances disclosures of fraud-related matters. So in summary, the PIOB staff considered that the PIOB public interest issues raised have been adequately addressed. And in conclusion, based on the analysis that we performed, the PIOB staff recommend the board to certify that ISA 240 revised has been developed in a manner consistent with a great due process and is responsive to the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Naraya. That was really succinct, but in all the detail that we needed. I'm just going to circle to the board members to check if there are any comments or questions that anybody would like to raise before I ask you to apply your minds to what was proposed by the oversight staff. Everybody comfortable? We've certainly had many opportunities to discuss the standard and the progress with the standard. Can I ask the PIOB members by the show of hands then, if you support the proposal that Nerea has put to us that we can certify ISA 240 for the two elements? Remember, we always look at due process, but we also look at whether it serves the public, whether it's responsive to the public interest, and our measurement is against what we over time have tracked as our public interest issues. So by a show of hands, can I see your support? Just want to make sure that I haven't missed anybody that's not in support. Okay, thank you. I think we can then therefore conclude that it has been certified. Well done, Tom and Willie and James and the team. Very well done. I really do believe that this is a significant step forward when it comes to also dealing with the expectation gap. Tom, you definitely want to say something, I've got no doubt.
Well, I'm really pleased, obviously, that ISA 240 revised has been certified, and really looking forward to confirming this to the marketplace. Obviously, we'll coordinate with your team. But to me, 240 and going concern were vexing issues for too long. I'm glad that our board decided to take decisive action here. I think in both instances, driving clarity about the positive requirements for an auditor in this space, being really clear how it ties to the risk-based approach of auditing, and being clear about what the appropriate response is, and then providing transparency in the auditor's report on both should go a long way at addressing the expectations gap. And these are two of the most important things that we've done during my time, and so really happy that it's out of the marketplace.
Thank you very much. Absolutely agree with that. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay, as we conclude then on the certification, we have one or two more things to do in the public session before we go into a private session. We have, Martin, the public minutes from the April meeting, which Tom and Gabriella has also cast an eye to make sure that we appropriately represented what was said from their side. Martin, anything that you want to say on those minutes before I ask the board members to approve it?
No, nothing to add, Linda. Just look forward to any board comments.
Thank you. And can I ask board members if there are small edits that you've picked up, because those tend to always creep in, please would you just pass them on to Martin and Rathio, the team, directly. But if you have any concerns in principle, now would be the time to raise them. Everybody comfortable? Can I see your hand in support of approving the minutes? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And then we have one or two small things to do. We need to, Martin, maybe just spend a minute on the calendar for the rest of the year. We are now well through 50% of the year. We've got 2 more rounds of observations to do, Martin, so I'm sure you just want to spend a minute to remind us where we are.
Yes, thank you, Linda. In fact, I can be very brief indeed. I mean, clearly we always allocate observers to the SSB meetings, and we've done that. We'll probably need to just revisit that a little bit in relation to the fact that the observations for the time being are being done virtually. And we obviously have to just make sure that the time zone differences do not, make that impossible to be achieved in a meaningful way. So we may change some of the allocation of observers, but there's no further changes there. We do intend to carry out our observations in the usual way.
Okay, perfect. So you'll be in contact, especially with the existing observers in the next week or two. Martin, I've had a pre-discussion on this, and let's just see how we put that together. Mark.
Yeah, just two observations on this timetable. I think we should add to it the call to consider the certification of PI Track 2 in August. And I'm not quite sure why we don't have a scheduled PIOB meeting in December. Perhaps that's going to be scheduled in January 2026 instead. But at that meeting or around that time, I think we're scheduled to consider the certification of the IAASB's experts standard. So I think we should factor either a full PIOB board meeting in the usual quarterly way, or a specific call to consider experts.
Yes, and we normally we don't have a December meeting. It depends how the standard setting board's timelines work out, because if the meetings are a little bit late, it goes into your Christmas holidays, and then we normally have it. We also don't have time for the staff to prepare all the documents and so on. So we will have the usual meeting in January, but obviously, Martin, you will work all of those in. And I think even though we haven't set the meetings for 2026 yet, it would be worthwhile for us to at least just set that first meeting so that people can start working it into their diaries. Thanks, Mark. And Martin, do you want to also talk about the due process approvals?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark. Indeed, in a sense, that's exactly arising from the next item. So I was just going to mention that obviously we confirmed the 26th of August to do the certification of the PI Track 2, and we do need to then work out when we will do the second certification you referred to on the expert. So we will work through that, as you suggested, Linda, finding the right balance, because we do need some time after the SSB board meetings in December to be able to gather what is necessary to hold a meaningful board meeting. So we'll be looking at all of that in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll be able to confirm so that that's publicly available information as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Tom and Gabriella and Ken and Willie and James, for being here for the public session and for all your contributions and documents that you submitted. We can close the public session now, and I'm going to also at the same time ask the PIOB staff to recuse themselves from the meeting, as we're going to go into, with the exception of Martin, of course, but as we're going to go into a private session now. Thank you.